first day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't get a videographer for like our mind the gap performances, but we can at least give folks
pencil
a
that
right angle documentation.
the battle of showers.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really nice thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's no like, there's no additional cost.
Is it like something little?
Oh no, I am good. I appreciate it though. I had a snack in the car, but actually.
So for Mind the
this
Gap,
Saturday.
it's a partnership.
What about
So we
things like this?
we just we put these all into like we have a Mind the Gap tonight. So we were in for yesterday. We maximize this little partnership where we can and try to
Oh, don't we?
fill the empty hours with like a workshop or a members meeting. So yeah, we had our dress and tech yesterday, and then this today, and then a show tonight. I think it's Brian's. He was in there heating up some. I don't know if it's pizza. It is so nice outside.
Ooh. For work or for leisure or for something.
I know.
Yeah, you can smell.
Morning dog walks have been really, really
Right?
luxurious.
Oh, different dance festival.
Oh, nice.
Oh, I can sit outside on the
I
front.
talked to
You
classes.
must be so appreciative. I feel like I guess it's like that when you come out of like the winter and
Oh,
it's
that's
used to.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
And then I performed.
Yeah.
The work that
Ooh. Lama Lisa?
But I think it goes
Very
away
cool.
after tomorrow. I think Thursday we get another front that blasts us back into what like September normally is.
It's still, I mean,
Oh,
It's not
New
terrible.
Orleans is a very joyous place to be, even though
It's just
very-
when those
it'll
lows.
be humid.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
It's very shocking.
Yeah, get those lows below 70s.
But I appreciate it deeply.
We're really good.
there's like more exchange.
Yeah. Did you guys participate in Match's strategic planning process?
I did.
How was that? Like, it's finished, right?
I think so. I was part of a working group.
Was there like a good strategy?
I don't know, like
There was like subgroups that all reported up. to
yeah, I don't know like what their like final, but like I know a piece of it, like to sort of address the loss of the like city planning. They did recently like restructure rental pricing in a way that's like smart, like it's very like tiered and like if you meet all 5 like categories that are in alignment with their mission, then it's this price, and then
Okay.
based on like what type of organization
Okay.
you are, like there's, it's like it's a little complicated, but it also
Although,
makes it so
you
that
should just do it all in one.
you're
No.
Like
if your
No.
rental is not in full alignment with
Do
the
you
mission,
date when you write in your notebook?
that's fine. You're paying more.
Okay. Keep them separate
So
because
there's-
it becomes a
They've
really
done
great
some
archive.
stuff there.
Because you can always just be
Don't
like,
know.
oh, this is a like dance making notebook of mine from like 17 years ago.
I mean, I think there was
Let me see what was happening
gonna be an
with
attempt
that version of you.
Mm-hmm.
to try it
Versus like if it's
again,
all in
like,
one
is there-
notebook, it's
is
like,
there a
oh
way?
god, I'm just gonna have to scour
Yeah.
But
and see
also
what I was
doing
writing about every day.
a lot more like development that hadn't
No, I don't know why.
really been happening.
It's
So
beautiful
just,
penmanship.
they're working
You think so?
with a development
Yes.
I feel like it's so bad.
consultant to start.
No, it's like so in line. And I just love cursive.
Yeah, no, that'll be what happens.
You're almost done with the year once again.
But yeah, I feel like there's like a community education piece like just on like this space and how it like
That is like a core.
the long
We have a
history
lot
of
of
how it
core
came to
notebook
be and then how it
situations going
has
on.
functioned at a highly subsidized rate.
Yeah.
I know you're thinking we're living 10 years ago. Like
This is the
yeah,
system that
our
you've
office
created that
right,
keeps you
right
well
has
and
changed
organized.
in the 80s.
Who is
Sort of.
anyone to condemn it?
I don't know if I'm organized,
Um,
but I try.
and I don't think that there's an
But,
awareness of how much
I really like this.
that was only possible
I hope I can find it again.
by
Hmm.
It's a
that
general.
commitment
Just
from the
But
city.
it's the same
has
history
like the
with
margins.
Gentle and Seventy and
The,
you know,
Mhm.
this is what I always look for.
their
Mhm.
offices.
But I think when they found it,
Not that way, but
it's only like a little
subsidized.
tiny section where they don't show the
Good,
whole
how are you?
model. The
Pretty
one
good,
is like
pretty
the
good.
one,
Good to see you.
like a year and then.
I got your slides.
Okay.
We've got both of y'all scanned.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
probably
haven't
makes sense.
had like a physical agenda, but I have a lot of online calendars. And today I finally learned how I can merge all of those calendars
Yeah.
into one.
Yeah.
It was the best thing ever. It has made me less confused darn near immediately.
Yeah. And you have Google and then Apple Calendar.
I currently have the Google Calendar, the Apple Calendar, and then two
It's very confusing.
Microsoft Outlook calendars.
Like,
Are you using Microsoft?
Merged all of
so
them.
there's just
All of them into one glorious calendar. Oh! I met this man. Oh, I've not met him, but I have seen him.
Yeah.
And now I'm trying to remember.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh,
I
you're
just
good.
hit you.
You're good.
Good to see you.
I have a very thick, sturdy leg.
Good to see you out and about. Yeah.
Hey. Hello.
What are you?
Oh, was you want?
I was like, I can go this way. I don't mind climbing around.
Okay.
I have a spread.
But I was like, what do you eat? Something like a fight.
Very nimble.
I just saw terrible news, so I'm just like,
Oh no.
no, it was like something that's like
Eyes and ears and mouth and nose. What's up?
no, it was even through. And I was like, I had this conversation with Albany yesterday. We're recording it for like the normalization requirements of that, and like how there's much
Forward.
is like socially culturally acceptable. That's like anyway. So just like maybe think of that conversation I had yesterday. Yeah, around the way that way.
Or you can just go here.
It's alright. I was just like, it's one of those
Go
things.
towards that green little thing in the corner. On the other side of
It's like
that
I
door.
almost have
There's
conversations like this.
facility
conversation on arts funding and advocacy around that. I'm Molly with Dance Source Houston. The rest of our team is here. Brittany greeted you at the door, and John is in the back. A few months ago, I guess maybe late spring, we polled our membership community to see where folks just had general questions. Come on in, Jill. You're fine. Around things in dance, not specific to funding, but we received a lot of questions about specifically public funding. At the time, it was right after all of the NEA cancellations came in. And so that obviously elevated the always important topic of public funding for the arts. So we invited Marcy Dallas and Harrison Guy to share some information on experience with public funding, but also some local advocacy efforts that are happening and how we can all become more empowered as artists or supporters of the arts. So we'll hear from both Harrison and Marcy, and then we'll have time for some questions and discussion as well. So thank you, Harrison and Marcy, for being here, and Harrison is going to start us off.
All right, hello everyone.
Hello.
So I am Harrison Guy. I'm the founder and artistic director of Urban Souls Dance Company, and I'm also the director of arts and culture for the 5th Ward Cultural Arts District, and I manage the Deluxe Theater. So today I'm going to kind of get to some funding tips, or what I'm calling tips today, but there's a journey that undergirds it, so you're going to have to learn my dance story today. So bear with me as I take you through that journey. Cool? All right, so from instincts to impact, pretty much I'm a huge believer in gut instincts, essentially. That's the main idea of this. We can stop there, but I am truly a advocate for believing what you believe and really going full throttle on those things. All right. So my beginnings, I grew up in Lamarck, Texas, small town. I was a very feminine kid. I've always danced. Dance was always supported in my household, in my community. And so I've always had a very positive relationship to dance, the body, and what that could become. So I was a pretty feminine kid growing up, and my family also supported that and loved me as I was. That became really the foundation for me believing I can do anything, which I didn't know I needed it, but I would need it later to do things like this. And so I faced a lot of bullying at school. So there was a drastic difference between my community, my home, and school. It was like heaven and hell, literally. All right? So dance really became my safe space, and it really was the first language. It was like, something feels right here with the way I move my body. So art gave me a voice when words failed me, and I like to tell this story. If you've ever talked to me, I probably already told you this, but for those of you who don't know, I like to talk about 4th grade because it's where it became really pivotal for me, because that's where I experienced the most bullying or the most different outside of my house. And so I had a teacher who I gave hell, unfortunately. So I was a problem child in 4th grade, and as you know, you spend a lot of time in those core development ages with the teacher, so it's a lot of time. So just imagine me, being bullied, taking it out on my teacher for about 75% of the day. So luckily I had a 4th grade teacher who was just awesome. And she pulled me to the side and she was like, hey, I know that you dance and you sing at church. I want to write a musical and I want you to be the lead. And I didn't know what a musical was. I didn't know what that meant, but she's like, you're going to get to perform. I think your peers will see that you're good at something, and hopefully it will help to lessen them bullying you. And I just said, okay. What is interesting about this is my 4th grade teacher, this was my core teacher. She was not the theater teacher. She was not the music teacher. She, outside of her day, said, I'm going to advocate for you and write a whole musical, and you're going to be the lead. And so I like to tell that story because, A, I love teachers like that. And then I try to become a teacher like that. I teach at PVA now, and so I try to impart that same type of advocacy with my students. But it all started in 4th grade with Jennifer Kempton, who lives in Dallas. And that also, it worked. I performed, my peers saw me doing something good, and I kind of became the cool kid a little bit. And so dance became really useful for me beyond expressing myself and feeling connected to my community. It really became who I was in 4th grade. Now again, I didn't know that at the time because I was only in 4th grade, but that's what it became. And so one of the takeaways I have from Ms. Kempton is one person's belief can change everything. To know that at 4th grade has guided my life in an amazing way. I've always believed you don't need 1,000 people to make change. You can do it with one person, 2 people. And so that is really important to how I built the company. So fast track you, I danced all through middle school and high school. I became the dancing mascot for Lamarck High School, which is still my claim to fame. If you meet anyone, my hometown calls me Harry. And so if you meet anyone from Lamarck and you say Harry, they're gonna say, oh, he was the cougar. He's the best mascot we've ever had. Essentially what they're saying is I danced, basically, in the mascot uniform. And so that's also where I got a taste of performance on a different level, because of course it's way more people who came to see the musical. Probably was 100 people who saw the musical, but now it's in stadiums. And so I got to feel the magic of performance for large audiences. And so again, still connected to my community, because this is my high school, right? So the mascot was a badge of honor for my community. All right, from music to movement. So I was a band kid, surprise. I was also a theater kid. I did way too much in high school. But I really thought, because of Miss Kempton, I knew I wanted to be a teacher, and the thing I liked the most at the time was band. And so I went to college, I went to Prairie View A&M University, thinking I was gonna be a band director. I learned very quickly that I did not like music theory, and so I said, no ma'am, Miss Pam, all right? But I really still love band and still love I'm still a band kid, but something just didn't feel right with it. And so everything shifted for me when I saw the college's dance troupe do a Horton-based performance in the gymnasium. There were 8 guys dancing. I had never seen black men dance like that in my life. It was an amazing piece, and I just sat there and thought, I think I'm supposed to be doing that. I had no idea about dance classes or anything like that, what the journey was, but something said, that's home for you. So I auditioned. I was awful, but they still let me in. And so I joined Classic Dance Ensemble at Prairie View, and that's where I really started to learn like dance and technique, and whoa, what a world, right? The very first company I saw was Dallas Black Dance Theater. Armando was on the stage at that time, but that was my first time seeing a professional company at Prairie View after I joined the troupe. So it opened this whole new world for me that felt like community, but also dance, was also black. Something about it just felt extremely right for me. That's important because basically I tried to recreate that moment, and that's how we got Urban Souls. So once I started to dance in Prairie View, you can imagine, I'm late to the party. I'm way late. I'm probably 19, and everyone else been dancing since they was 2 and 3. But luckily, I got a scholarship at the Met from Darrell Martin, where basically they just wanted guys to dance, and I got to go take dance for free. And when I tell you, I spent every day trying to catch up, trying to figure out, now I got to figure out how to turn, how to be flexible. And what I love about that is that became also not just a scholarship, but also a source of community. And so I saw this continuing theme that I was most attracted to was community. So Michelle Smith and Darrell pretty much took me under their wing for a few years. And then I got into the Ailey School for the summer program, which is a very crazy story because this is all too fast for real life. So I end up at the Ailey School very early in my dance journey, and it was just this overwhelming feeling of everything is feeling more and more like home, more and more like me. I was incredibly inspired by the Ailey organization. Yes, I took dance all the time, but I was in the offices learning about marketing, learning about their capital campaign, because I was just so excited to see such a large dance institution, and I had access to the backbone. So I learned a lot about the business of dance while I was there, and also I danced a lot. So I spent 2 years immersed in Alvin Ailey's legacy in New York. Amazing time. I hated New York. So I said, I'm going to go back to Texas, and the first place I auditioned was for Dallas Black. Remember that Dallas Black was the very first dance company I ever saw on stage. And so it was amazing to be offered a position with their second company. It would include a lot of teaching, and at that time I wasn't trying to be no teacher. I'm old, and I only got a few years to dance. I need to be performing. So I came back to Houston because I knew I wanted to be in Texas, and I helped to start 2 dance companies. Darrell Martin's Dance Fusion and Exclamation Dance Company. And so a lot of people, so I left college to do this, and I went to New York, and everyone was pressing me to stay in New York, because why would you leave New York and go back to Texas if you have a good experience here at Ailey? It's just, this is where you're supposed to be. But there was something inside of me that didn't feel like community in New York, and that's the piece that was missing. And so I came back to Houston, or to Texas first, because I was still yearning to do dance through a community lens. Again, this is all in reflection. I had no idea what I was doing at the time. I was just trying to hurry up and dance. All right, so Urban Soul started from a free modern dance class As I told you, I helped to start these 2 companies. Neither one of them was my artistic voice. They were okay, but it wasn't my voice. So I always knew I wanted to choreograph, and I had already been making dances on the side and things like that. So I ended up teaching a free modern dance class on Sundays. Whoever wanted to come move. It's very equitable, it's very accessible before these were buzzwords. And anyone could take class. So on Sundays, we had a ball. And one day, someone just said, we should perform. And I had never really thought about the group performing, because again, I was trying to craft my style, and I just didn't feel like we were good enough to be on stage, to be completely honest, because the class was, again, lots of people who danced years ago, who were learning to dance for the first time, mixed in with people who were actually professional dancers. So that, I said, okay, we got Dance Houston came about, which was a festival at the time. We did Dance Houston the first year. Well, I did Dance Houston for the first year. I say we to make it seem like we were a company, but it was a name and me at first. So I did a solo at Dance Houston, and that's where Urban Soul started in 2004. So while I was there, Andrea Cody, who runs Dance Houston, she was a huge advocate for me, kind of like Jennifer Kempton in 4th grade. And she's the person who pushed me to start the company. She was like, you need a name. You need to do this on your own. And I'm like, okay. So I trusted her. She reminded me a lot of Miss Kempton as well. So what we started to do, once I debuted the company, I was like, okay, who are we going to perform for? We have no audience. What do we do? And so I did what felt right to me, which was to go where? Community, all right? So I built a dance audience from Black churches, fraternities, sororities, anybody who I felt community with. That became my dance community. At the time, it was unconventional because there was this perceived dance community that had a perceived dance audience that was not trying to come see my shows. So I looked within and kind of used what we had in. And what that did for me is it really made me focus on what stories I wanted to tell. Because if my audience is completely Black, or majority Black, they're coming from churches and sororities, the types of dances that they would like would probably be something that they resonate with. And so that's where I started to really hone in my storytelling of local Black stories. And that became really, really the foundation of Urban Souls, is telling local Black history. We dance about other things too, but that kind of became our pillar. So in 2005, so the company started in 2004. 2005, I applied for my first grant with Diverse Works, did not get the grant, and was completely sour about it, okay? But one of the that was when everything was on paper and it kind of gave you the whole packet and you could read people's feedback. The feedback was insane. It just made no sense. But one of the feedbacks was, this is a great application, but we don't know your work, because this is my first time ever applying. I just got back to Houston. And so I thought, well, how would they see my work though? Because at that time, the dance community was not very equitable. They weren't coming to see my shows. I knew that. And so it was kind of like this weird conundrum that I was now in, because in order to get the grants, they have to see your work. And if they're not coming to see their work, then how do I get the grant? And so I kind of knew early on that I needed to come up with something different besides writing for grants, right? So I didn't write grants for probably 15 years of Urban Souls. No grants. So we chose not to rely on grants. I'll say I chose, because everyone was not on board with this. But I chose. And what we did instead was we held a grassroots fundraiser before each show. So we would have a fundraiser. We would raise, let's say, $8,000. We have a budget of $8,000 to put on this show. What that did for us, is it tired us out and drained me considerably. But what it did also was it allowed us to look within our community to fund our shows. So that meant fundraisers tailored to our people, not big fancy galas, because the price point would not make sense, right? So we started doing very small things, happy hours, anything that we thought our people would want to come to, and that became our method. And what that did, by the time we decided to become a nonprofit, being on our board was very attractive to people because we were not in any debt. We owed no one a penny. And so to people that served on board, they thought that was phenomenal. They really liked that it was a different model, and they really loved that they didn't have to come in and help us get over a hill of debt. So that's kind of where we started. We stayed committed, we stayed debt-free. And so what I want to impart on you is, because I know that everyone's searching for grants, I know that everyone's searching to meet foundations, but my journey, and the reason I wanted to tell you this, is because you have a lot of capital in your life that is not money, that can turn into money. And those are people. That is your community. There is some capital within. Now, it might not be as big as the grants that are out there, but it should be a part of how you raise your money. You have to look within and around you. And those people I had one person tell me early on in Urban Souls, he said, I'm not going to be your biggest donor, but I'm going to be your most consistent. And I said, I love that. He said, you can count on me. And so I was like, okay, that's the method. I want consistent people. I'm not looking for the big bucks, but I needed to be consistent. And it really did work for us. And I know that's not good news because it was a lot more work than just applying for all the grants that I Googled. But what it ended up doing is we not only had an audience, we had true community. I remember a time that we had to exit a dancer and our audience was livid. Like they weren't just coming to see shows. They were like, we're a family. Like, this is just not right. So it became really a community. And again, that C word I use a lot. So when we formed Urban Souls, we became a 501c3. We created the nonprofit with the board and friends and our community members. What I like to say about this is we were building leadership versus recruiting leadership. And so oftentimes we look around and say, who's already been on a board that's not on a board right now? Or who's tired of being on this board? Or who can do 2 boards? We didn't do it that way. What we did instead was we said, we're going to build leadership. We're going to find people who we already think are leaders, period, or have leadership potential, and we're going to teach them how to be on a board. That's how we built our very first board, and they became a very high-producing board. We got to the point where we weren't doing any of those fundraisers before shows. We were doing a 3-show season, and it was completely funded by our board and how they were going out to get money. And this has always been with me being just a hobbyist. It wasn't even part-time. It was, sometimes I wasn't getting paid. Until the board came along and was able to really give us that backing. But again, this is about looking within, and this is not who I thought the board was going to be, but it proved to be really great. And what is awesome is the very first board we have, those people have gone on to serve on major boards in Houston, chair major boards in Houston, and they tell everyone, I learned how to be on the board from the dance community. I learned this through an arts nonprofit, like, make no mistake about it. And so I think that's a really good way of us knowing that we can teach people things that are not just dance. And so I love that story as well. All right, so getting out of your dance bubble. So I realized I needed to step outside the dance bubble earlier on when I was telling you that we were kind of considering that people weren't going to come see our shows, mainly because we were ethnic specific, and that meant that sometimes people didn't know what that meant for them or what that place was, or some people just wasn't interested in black things, okay? For whatever the reason, we knew that we had to look outside of that dance bubble. So I started engaging civically. I started really like serving on task force and really getting into politics because I felt politics was a great bridge to people who did not know about the dance and arts community at all. And when I say at all, to hear them talk about art was brutal in the beginning. But I felt that we needed to be in those rooms and at those tables for, A, community building, but also just so they know what we have going on. So getting out of the silo of dance is a great tip I want to offer you because a lot of great things came after that. So we built relationships with leaders in education, business, and civic life. We expanded our circles to include more than just arts friends. And that felt really, really good, and it still feels really good. So Urban Souls today is a home for artists, dancers, and storytellers. It's rooted in black history, culture, and community. We have a dedicated audience and dancers. I had to push my dancers and say, go dance for other people too. Because the environment we created, again, is a community environment, so it feels good. And I know that's not something you can put in an Excel spreadsheet, but it is still data. And then becoming the Black Arts Movement Houston. So after 20 years, we've decided that we want to do more than dance for the black community. And this came out of us really getting out of our bubble and learning, oh, we can solve a lot of problems that have nothing to do with dance. And so we've created an organization called the Black Arts Movement Houston. It's the parent company of Urban Souls. But all of that, I told you, was the confidence building that got us to this point. There's no way in the world we would have thought we can do this years ago. I mean, it took a lot for us to even become a dance nonprofit. But it has led us to a place that we want to do something that feels more citywide, it's more expansive than just dance, because we have so many new friends that want to do more. And so the Black Arts Movement Houston is our new organization, if you hear it, and Urban Souls is a program under the Black Arts Movement Houston. So the lessons learned that I really want to give to you to take away is the first one, community versus industry. Community is built with intention and consistency. I had dreamed and hoped for a dance community that would love me and accept me. No, community is how you build it. And so we built our own community, right? Relationships are capital. The strongest currency you'll ever have are people. And that is not, people have a lot that they're sitting on and you don't know that because you're not having conversations with them. We've received so much, both money, access to venues, access to people, and it all came because we believe that relationships are capital. Don't wait for permission, build your own stage when doors don't open. I'm pretty sure that was very clear. Urban Souls was built from scratch. I built it from scratch, so I can tell you that we didn't ask for permission. I was like, this is what we're gonna do, and the audience will come, and they certainly did come. The other one is consider every room. Sometimes as artists, and specifically as dancers, we think very, very small in terms of what the scope is. And I would encourage you to really get in rooms that have nothing to do with dance, that have nothing to do with art, but they have everything to do with your lived experience, whether it is a civic club, a neighborhood club, a PTA. All those rooms are very useful, and there are people who know nothing of it. They don't know we exist, honestly, but they need us to be in those rooms. The second part is because we're amazing, and choreographers are amazing, dancers are amazing. The rooms that you're not in, they need you. They need your voice. They need to hear from you. You need to be in conversations about transit, about parking, about infrastructure. We need to be a part of those because we are innately leaders, but we only lead within a very small scope. And so I want to push you to go into other rooms. And then the last one is touch your intelligences. Some people call this a knack. Some people call it common sense. It's intelligence that you have learned, that you have earned. Really lean into those. Lean into your community, your identity, and your past experiences. That is capital. That will also bring you resources to do the thing that you want to do, which is to make dances. So this last piece is really the piece that I really want to hone in on. Yes, we did an unconventional journey, so you can do things differently. You don't have to do things like everyone else. It's good to get feedback and learn how people got to where they are, but oftentimes that just becomes par for the course. You really need to figure out your own path, and it is okay if it looks silly to other people. It is also okay to fail. There were 20 years, there were lots of things that I thought were amazing ideas, and everyone was like, pivot. No, this is not it. I'm like, okay, thank you for letting me try, right? But not being afraid to fail, and I think that really helped. I've never been afraid to fail publicly. People will say I tried, right? And that helped because a lot of times as arts organizations, we feel we have to get it right in front of everybody. It has to be perfect, and rarely is it perfect. So if you can lean into the fact that a lot of these things are experimental. We're trying things. We will fail. We will fail up. We will get back up, and we will try something else. Yes, we're resilient, but you got to lean into failure to get to resilient. We're not just innately resilient. So hopefully some of this resonates with you. This is just my little old dance story, but what I like most about it is it's very different than all of my friends' dance journey. And I think I learned things from their journeys, and we should be telling each other's dance stories because there's a lot of learning in there. So I encourage you also to talk to people about your specific journeys because I'm sure there are little tidbits that people can learn as well. Cool? All right. So now, thank you. Now I'm going to bring up my coworker. Now she's my coworker because I also work with Hugh Arts. Marcy Dallas is going to come tell you about Hugh Arts, which is an amazing initiative that I'm going to be working my butt off to make sure every dance community in Houston knows about Hugh Arts and is connected to Hugh Arts. So, Marcy Dallas. Yes, of course she has a question.
You casually mentioned that you raised $8,000 for a performance, and I feel like $8,000 is a lot of money to raise for a performance when you're just starting off.
That was in 2008.
How in the world did you do that?
So we just filled the room with people who liked us, and I think that they really didn't care what we danced about, honestly. It's just they liked what we were doing, and they wanted it to be successful. So we filled the room with them, and we made the goal $8,000. And we were like, we have to raise $8,000 in this room tonight. This is our one shot to get this amount for this show. We kind of put it out there that this isn't a if we get 6,000. If we don't get 8,000, we're not putting on the show. Because again, our commitment to each other was that if we don't raise the money we need for the show, we won't do it. We'll bank that for something else, but we will never be in debt. We started out saying that. So when we filled the room with people who liked us and really believed and gave them a goal and basically said, because you like us, here's our goal. This is our goal together. We have to raise this before we leave. People were calling people to come up to the fundraiser. People were calling people to make donations from the fundraiser. And I think that, I casually said it because today we ain't doing no show for $8,000 today. But at that time, it really was a lot of money. It really was. But I do think that, it's still a lot of money. But you know what I'm saying. Like, we've grown and the company gets bigger and dance is expensive because you got all these people, so it costs a lot to put on a good dance show when you think about it. But at that time, we were pretty impressed. We left there, we went in there with so much doubt. Like it really was just like, how much does it cost? Let's see. But how are we going to go from never having a fundraiser to our first fundraiser, raising $8,000? We honestly, inside, didn't believe we would do it. But it happened. And before half the way through, we knew we would make the goal, and we were like, oh. And what happened in that room is it felt good to meet the goal. So they came back to the next thing ready to meet the next goal. And we was like, oh, now it's 10. We're growing. We're getting more dancers, right? And so they kind of grew with us, but it became, their support became their thing. dance is what y'all do, but support is what we do. And they owned it. And so, but we were able to do that with just talking to people like regular people, not like, mission statement, right? Just regular people. Like if you came through us through a church, we leaned into the pieces that were more religious so that they know we understand your faith. We're putting your faith on stage. And that was a connection that can't be broken, right? And so LGBTQ community, when we're doing pieces specifically about me, they resonated with me because I'm a black gay man. That community felt supported and seen through our work. They wanted to get on board. And so it was just a lot of that movement building that was happening. And I like to say we're always building community. All this is basically community building. It's audience development, and we have to put it in, the gatekeeping worlds, but it's just community building. It is, and in your gut instinct how to build community. We all do. Wherever you build community, it translates into what we're doing in art.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about a project that Harrison and I are both working on called Hue Arts. So I'll just back up just to give you a sort of brief backstory, which is that in 2023, I think it was, Houston's 7 state-designated cultural districts came together with some funding from Houston Endowment, and Houston Endowment said to the cultural districts, if you had some money, what would you do if you were all going to work together on a project? What is it that you would be interested in doing? And so the cultural districts had many meetings and said, let's go ask the community what we should do. Like, we have some ideas, but let's go ask the community what we should do. And so we had a series of community conversations, and the community, I think, really was on the same page with what the cultural districts were thinking, which is that if we're all going to work together on something, what we want to see is a perception change about arts in Houston. We want people to think about arts and culture in Houston in a different way. And so what does that mean? What do we need to get people to think about arts and culture in a different way? We want people to understand the diversity that exists in the arts and culture scene in Houston. We want people to understand that arts isn't just capital A arts. It's also community festivals. Maybe it's the kinds of things that you don't think of traditionally as like what's arts in a city, or what's traditionally been funded by arts grants or public funding or some of those kinds of things. How do we change the narrative about those kinds of things? And so that is sort of like the origin story of how we came to where we are today with this Hue Arts project, which I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. So where we landed was this idea that arts and culture are the heartbeat of a thriving greater Houston region. One of the things that we heard, I underlined greater Houston region, because one of the things that we heard over and over and over again is like, well, I'm not eligible for Houston Arts Alliance funding because I don't fit within the city boundaries of Houston, or I live in Sugar Land, but I work in Houston, or I live in Pearland, but I work in Houston, or there are all these caveats because or I live in Bel Air and I'm not eligible for city funding because I don't live in the city of Houston. And so we really thought it was important to think regionally about what do we have at the county level, what do we have in the surrounding counties, what do we have in surrounding cities. So arts and culture are the heartbeat of a thriving greater Houston region. Too often the impact and needs of this essential sector are left out of the conversation. And so Hue Arts in Action was created as a unified approach to champion arts and culture across the region. So we are right now working on building a coalition of artists, organizations, business leaders, community ambassadors to amplify the collective voice of the creative sector and put arts on the agenda. And we are building that group now, and everyone is invited to be part of it, and we hope that you'll join us in this process. So I'll tell you a little bit about what it is that we're working on. So I'll just say that so we had this initial year where the cultural districts were talking to the community saying, what is it that you want? We want a perception change. Okay, so the cultural districts decided what we need some advocacy. We need champions of arts and culture in the Houston area. We need the art sector to understand what advocacy is, understand what exists now that maybe people aren't tapping into, that people could be tapping into, and what doesn't exist that we need to create, and how do we work together as a sector to make sure that that gets created. So championing arts and culture turned into this advocacy group. So then last year we did an open call for task force members. So we said, who wants to be part of this? And we had lots of people apply. And then we hired a consulting firm called Trepwise, and they selected this group of people who represented different kinds of arts and culture and who represented different parts of the Houston region. And then we had a series of community meetings to talk about, like, okay, when you say you want to advocate for arts and culture, what do you want to advocate for? So we need to figure that out together so that we can come up with a platform together. We released the plan in May of 2025. And this is what everybody said that they want to advocate for. So they said what's important to us and what we think will change people's perception of arts and culture, what will help us all do a better job and feel better supported, is if we can protect and grow public funding for arts and culture in the region. So that's not just the city, it's for the region. We can create vibrant cultural spaces so that whenever you go outside in different neighborhoods, you can experience arts and culture in the neighborhood that you're in. We can build pathways for prosperity for artists because you can't have an arts and culture sector without artists and arts workers. And also we need to communicate the richness of Houston's culture. So we need better storytelling about why the arts and culture are important and what they even are. And how will we do that? We need to put arts on the agenda. We need to define which agendas the arts need to go on, and then we need to work together as a sector to get arts on these agendas. And we need to build some of those partnerships, like Harrison talked about with Urban Souls, getting outside of the arts sector and looking at who are the other kinds of people in the city or in the county or in the region who we need to have partnerships with that are not arts people. And so the things that we're going to be working on are these four areas. So for public funding, the kinds of things that we'll be looking at together, and I say we meaning all of us because we all are going to do this together. The kinds of things that we're going to be looking at together is making sure that the hotel occupancy tax funds stay in place, that Houston, and I'll talk a little bit about it later, but that's the main source of funding for arts organizations and artists in Houston is the hotel occupancy tax fund, so we want to make sure that we don't lose those. We want to look at different kinds of things that fund arts or could potentially fund arts. So civic art ordinances, I'll talk a little bit about in a minute too. There are also management districts and TERSs, and the county doesn't use its hotel occupancy tax funds to fund arts and culture, and that's something that came up a lot in the meetings was, is there a way that we can bring in funding from the county that doesn't currently happen right now? And then there's a long-term goal to establish a permanent allocation for arts and culture. So first what we're going to do is look at sort of the low-hanging fruit, and then we're going to look at are there new sources of funding that could be created. And we're looking at models in different places. So we looked at what Broward County in Florida did. They established these funding sources that are separate from tourism-dependent models like we currently have right now with Houston, with the hotel occupancy tax funding. Vibrant spaces, looking at partnering with management district or TERSs or county precincts, people who are thinking about how can you make spaces more accessible for arts, how can you make parks more accessible for arts, how do you integrate local artists and performers into these spaces. Is there a way that we could work together to encourage, street front, ground level storefronts? That's happened quite a bit historically in Midtown right here whenever some of these apartments were being built. Traditionally, those spaces, I'll say, have been used for public art, meaning like visual art usually is what people mean whenever they say public art. There's a lot of conversation about can we expand the definition of public art to include performance art? Is there a way that, because why should we not be activating storefronts with performance art instead of just, visual art? Is there a way that we can go back and look at, back to the public funding piece, is there a way that we can look at some of the civic art ordinances that right now the way that they define what is allowable for civic art is very visual art focused, but is there a way that we could sort of expand that narrative to include performance art, which some cities and counties do. And so there are examples of that and there are precedents of that. And so sometimes it's just a matter of saying like, hey, did you ever think about this? And sometimes the answer is no, we didn't ever think about that. Let's consider it, And so we want to be bringing those kinds of things forward. an example from, this is in your neighborhood in Midtown. Wanting folks to be able to stumble upon arts happenings and walking distance around them. That's, the goal that people had at a lot of these conversations. We looked at examples from Denver, where there are government-supported facilities that artists can be involved in. There's this conversation about, historically how match has been funded. There's, city funding and county funding for some facilities that arts and cultural organizations have used in the past and can use potentially in the future that we probably need to look closer at and make sure that people understand how to access. Building pathways for artists and creatives. So looking at how we can integrate artists into, what are the kinds of things that the city spends money on or that Houston spends money on, and what are the access points that exist for artists. So you have this huge convention initiative that happens through Houston First and through Visit Houston. They're really focused on that sort of downtown area, especially with the expansion of conventions. But there's no real clear and easy way for an artist to get involved with some of those kinds of things. And so, I'm sure that when you go to conventions, there's usually like a band playing when you're getting off the bus, or a dance performance before I go to arts conventions, I'm sure go to arts conventions too, or there's a dance performance before lunch or something like that. And so, do artists know how to get on that list of people who might be hired for that sort of like regular gigs? Because there are always conventions that are happening there. So trying to figure out how to build the bridge and maybe create some translation of language so that people know how to access those things. And then seeing, once we sort of build that bridge of the things that already exist, the next step is, okay, what else could we do now that we're in these spaces? And so we're looking at how these things build upon themselves over time. I'll just skip over those examples for now. Effective storytelling. So this is really the idea about what we heard so many times was people who are from Houston or who live here or who are involved in the arts community here really understand the depth of the community that exists and the richness of the arts and cultural experiences that a person can have here. And if you go outside of Houston, many times people don't understand it the same way that Houstonians do. Like, Houstonians love Houston. Mm-hmm. And most people who are not Houstonians don't love Houston. And so how do you sort of explain to people who aren't from here and who don't get it in a new way? Because the idea is maybe like what we've been doing so far is only working to a certain extent, and do we need to rethink the way that we're sort of storytelling about arts and culture in Houston? So looking at that. Dallas, as an example, has a cultural district that works really closely with Visit Dallas. There are a lot of arts and culture people who are super engaged with Visit Dallas, who are super engaged with the FIFA World Cup, committee that's coming to Dallas. There's a major partnership that they've been working on building for a long time. And that benefits Visit Dallas because they know where to send people and know what stories to tell, and it benefits the arts community because they're better integrated into a network so that they don't have to do everything and all the heavy lifting on all the things, and they can sort of tap into networks that already exist. So how can we do that here? So these are the 4 areas that we're going to be looking at over the next 5 years: public funding, economic opportunity, vibrant spaces, and effective storytelling. As we we're sort of building a plan for how we approach these over the next 5 years. The first thing that we're going to do is we just hired a group of people that we're going to announce later on this week to lead these key areas. Because whenever we created the plan in the summer and we announced it, we thought, gosh, that's a lot of things on that list of things to do, and you have to make it manageable because, so often, I don't know, how much you guys are involved with advocacy organizations, but it's a long road, and sometimes it's a quiet road, and sometimes it feels a little lonely, and the tasks are large. And so we have to break this down into manageable bites, and we have to make it accessible for people, and we have to sort of like create small goals along the way. And then what happens is you look back 5 years later and you're like, look at what we did. but we have to create these sort of small goals along the way. So we've broken these up into working groups, and we're about to, whenever we announce the leadership of each of the working groups, we're going to ask the community to tell us that they want to be involved with one of these working groups and help to work on one of these areas. So I'm going to just give an example of what we're thinking about for public funding, because this is sort of why Molly called, I think, in the first place, and it is the number one of all the conversations, as you can imagine. Whenever we were talking to the community about what do people want to advocate for, more money obviously was like the number one thing that people wanted to talk about. So I thought we would just talk a little bit about what exists right now and what we might be looking at. So the way that we have been thinking about this is like, what happens if funding is reduced for arts and culture? We have to communicate a message that if funding is reduced for arts and culture, there will be job losses. There is a loss of joy, people, and well-being if the arts shrink, right? If funding's maintained, we just tread water and, hang out and do what we're doing. But there's also the possibility to boost the economy and energize the cultural scene and strengthen public health. Like, there's so many arguments for arts and culture. And so looking at how we message this out to people about what could happen, if they can take the journey with us. So again, those were the things that we're looking at, potentially starting with is, I don't know how to go back. So, but we're looking at hotel occupancy tax funds at the city and the county level. We're looking at civic art ordinances because those things pay for arts and culture. I'll show you a little bit about that. So the platform area is which one of those things is the working group, and this is going to be the work of the working group. So what's the working group going to decide to start with? Maybe they start with, we want to look at expanding funding at the county level because that doesn't currently exist, and there are some people who live outside of Houston city limits that do work technically sort of like in our area, but they have no access to funding. So say that's the platform area that the working group decides to start with, and then we have to understand sort of like the baseline, like what currently exists, so that we can know what we want to ask for. And then we have to train the sector, train the members of the working group and also the art sector about sort of what is it that we know and how are we going to communicate that out together to people, and setting those annual priorities to move things along. So that's sort of the structure that we're going to put together. And so I thought I'd share just sort of like what we know about the way that public funding works and the way that people in Houston access it. So when we think about public funding, that's government funding, right? So there's funding at the federal level, there's funding at the regional level, the state and the county and the city level. So at the federal level, we think mostly of the National Endowment for the Arts. There are other organizations that fund, or entities that fund from the federal level, like IMLS and National Endowment for the Humanities funds many art projects, which was also like Humanities Texas is what funded that at the state level. But there's a lot of talk about NEA, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Then there are regional arts organizations that distribute public funding. Mid-America Arts Alliance is our regional arts organization. They distribute public funding, but they also raise their own private philanthropy that they put out there, and I know that some artists in Houston have received some of their individual artist grants. There's Texas Commission on the Arts, which is a grant program for arts organizations of a certain size. At the county level, the funding comes from Harris County Commissioners directly. And at the city level, it's the City of Houston via Houston First, or Houston Arts Alliance. So at the National Endowment for the Arts, there's a lot of talk right now about what's happening there. There's so much uncertainty. I will tell you that this summer, the budget that was put forward by Donald Trump did not include funding for National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, or IMLS. But this summer, whenever the Senate met, they did include funding for those entities within the budget. They included $207 million in the annual budget for the National Endowment for the Arts. Last Trump administration, he also zeroed out funding for those entities, but then the House and the Senate came through in a bipartisan way and kept the money in the budget, so that's what happened last time. The difference, as I'm sure you all know, this time that didn't exist last time were the executive orders that go in place that sort of like override some of the ways that things have been done before, and that's the thing that is like sort of shifting the sand underneath everybody's feet, not knowing how to respond or react, or even what people are eligible for anymore. And the answer to where we stand on that right now is that it is very unclear, and it is very uncertain what's going to happen with funding through the National Endowment for the Arts through this administration. I think that there will be funding there. What they fund is a question. But also just putting this in terms of understanding how it impacts us in Houston. So there's a $207 million annual budget for the NEA, but only about $600,000 of that comes in the form of grants in Houston. And it mostly goes to sort of the large organizations, because you have to, it's, a complicated grant application. Individual artists aren't eligible for it. And so it's about $600,000 in grants. The last time we had like a sort of a full year of grant funding that went through. There are people who are watching this closely, Americans for the Arts, Dance USA, who are regularly reporting out on what's happening with the National Endowment for the Arts. At Mid-America Arts Alliance, there are no changes yet. They receive some of their funding from the National Endowment for the Arts. They fund all the regional arts organizations. Those are the ones at the bottom. So the United States is divided into these regions. Each one has a regional arts organization. They get, I forget what percentage of their funding comes from the NEA, but they all also have private philanthropy that supports their programs. They haven't changed any of their grants at this time. There's been some uncertainty about okay, so say there's an executive order that happens that impacts the National Endowment for the Arts. Does that mean the funding that the NEA gives to Mid-America Arts Alliance is also impacted? So do they have to follow the same rules? And right now, they haven't answered that question. So I think everybody's just sort of like proceeding. But the truth is that we don't know the answer to that question yet. But there are no changes yet. At the state level, Texas Commission on the Arts gets funded directly from the state legislature. So the Texas legislature meets every 2 years. They just met and the session just ended in June. And Texans for the Arts is the advocate for the arts at the state level. I know we brought a bunch of people from Houston to go to their Arts Advocacy Day to advocate for funding at the state level. And we did amazingly well this year, given all of the craziness that's happening. So we did see an increase of almost $8 million in the TCA's budget over the next 2 years, because they set their budgets in 2-year cycles, because they meet every 2 years. Again, to put this in context, the annual budget for Texas Commission on the Arts for the whole state is $14 million. About $4 million of that comes to Houston every year. At the county level, funding flows primarily through the commissioners themselves. So there's no sort of like central source of funding in the same way that there is at the city level. So at the city, there's hotel occupancy tax funds that are distributed through grants via Houston Arts Alliance. The county also has a bucket of hotel occupancy tax funds that there are more strict rules about how they can use those. They're really focused on tourism, because hotel occupancy tax funds are generated by tourists. And so tourism is supposed to be directly supported by the hotel occupancy tax work. So there's sort of like a layer that was put in place by the attorney for the county that has to tie any funding from the hotel occupancy tax much more directly to tourism than the rules exist at the city level. That's one of the things that we're going to be advocating for, is there a way that we can change that? Is there a way that we can look at a broader definition about what hotel occupancy tax can be used for at the county level, so that we can create some kind of general fund that exists for the arts at the county level, which would include Houston, but it would also include sort of unincorporated Harris County and other parts of Harris County that are not currently included inside what the city of Houston does with the city hotel occupancy tax funds. There is some money that's new, actually. It's only been there for about 2 years that supports the arts. It's about $2 million in 2024 and 2025. That's a public art fund. That's another example of a place that it is a public art fund that is focused on visual art, but there has been a conversation that has already existed through Precinct 1 about can we change the definition of what public art is. And so that's a conversation that the Hugh Arts Public Funding Working Group is going to be very closely working on. You should join it if you're interested in that conversation. And then there are discretionary funds that each county commissioner has that funded. I don't know if you saw, like in the news, that Precinct 2 gave Alma in East End a big chunk of funds. So there's some discretionary funds that exist like that too. Oh, we can't go back. Okay, then at the city level, you guys probably know a lot of this, but at the city level, funding comes through Houston First and through Houston Arts Alliance, primarily for public funding for the arts. There is no budget line in the city budget for arts and culture. There is instead money that flows through Houston First via the hotel occupancy tax funds that get redistributed out through Houston Arts Alliance. In 2023, Houston Arts Alliance, through those hotel occupancy tax funds, gave about $16 million to arts organizations and $2 million to individual artists in Houston. I can't figure out how to go back on this, but if we could go back, you'll remember that the NEA money that comes to Houston is about $600,000, and the Texas Commission on the Arts money that comes to Houston is about $4 million. So by far, the public funding that impacts Houston artists and arts organizations is the city's hotel occupancy tax funding. So that's the one we have to make sure stays in place. And then the question is, how do we build upon that kind of thing? There's also a civic art program that also is primarily managed through Houston Arts Alliance's Civic Art Division. It's 1.7% of any eligible city-funded construction. So when the city's building a building, 1.7% of that budget has to go towards art projects. The budget for that is about $15 million annually. That, again, is like a straight-up traditional visual arts project. And then in addition to that, the city owns and Houston First manages 10 different venues. 7 of those venues are cultural venues, including parking garages. We're standing at Match right now. Houston First has been a partner with Match for a long time. That conversation's, I think, in the works about what that relationship's going to look like going forward. Miller Outdoor Theater is one of those, the Wortham. And so there is also some sort of city subsidizing of arts and cultural facilities through the Houston First program. Okay, we'll take questions about those kinds of things later, but I just want to get through all of these parts too. So how can you get involved? Because this is an initiative that we are building together. The only way for us to make any of these sort of like numbers move or changes happen is that we have to work together as a sector to both understand the system as it currently exists, figure out how we work within the system, and then figure out how we sort of like build upon the system that currently exists. So we have a website, it's huarts.org. On that website, you can sign up for the newsletter, so you'll see whenever we have things to announce or events happening or things that we want you to come to or ways to get involved. You can learn more about, we have all sort of detailed information about what it is that we're trying to do. We also have some impact stats about arts and culture, which I'll show you a little bit in a second. You can sign up. There's a sign-up form to be an arts and culture champion. That means that, like, for example, last week, Midtown, I'll give you an example. Midtown recently, since we're in that neighborhood, Midtown recently cut their arts funding. The Midtown Management District or Redevelopment Authority recently cut their arts funding. That funding supported a micro-grant program that they did for artists inside of the parks. It funded 2 arts festivals that happened every year because the Midtown community said that they wanted the Management District and the Redevelopment Authority to focus on public safety and not arts and culture. And so we did a call to people who had signed up on our website to be arts and culture champions and said, because you have to fill out your address so we could see who lived in Midtown, and we sent a note to the people who were in Midtown to say, hey, can you come to this board meeting that the Midtown Management District is having and tell them why arts and culture is important to you in Midtown? And we had people come, and they put it back in. This just happened. They put the $200,000 back in. But it takes that, right? And it takes everybody, and it takes us to know who lives in Midtown. It takes us to know whenever there are these conversations happening, we need to know who says, I'll help. If you need something specific, call me. That's the kind of thing that the Arts and Culture Champions will do. So I encourage everyone to please sign up for that. And then you can join a working group. So what the working groups are going to be doing, they'll start probably in November. So in those 4 different areas, they'll meet monthly and do some kind of networking, learning about, the first step is sort of learning about something. So maybe a subject matter expert will come in, maybe somebody who's done a great job with one of these things in another city will come in and talk to everybody. Maybe people will just sort of share examples of things that are happening nearby, like what's happening in Sugarland or what's happening in Pearland or what's happening in the Woodlands. How can we all learn from each other? I teach in the University of Houston's Arts Leadership Program, and last night was our class, and it's just astounding to me how much last night's class, I didn't say anything. I sat in the back of the room for 3 hours, and everybody in the class was just sort of sharing experiences and conversations about sort of what they're facing right now. There is so much knowledge that exists within our sector right now. We just have to figure out how to better integrate with each other and how to better tap into the resources that each other has. I mean, we have it. We just have to sort of get ourselves together and meeting regularly and having these conversations to push this thing going forward. So I encourage everybody to please join us. Also, we have these newly created social media accounts. So you can follow along on the social media accounts. Tell people about this initiative, encourage them to get involved. We want as many voices at the table as possible, especially if you know somebody who doesn't live in Houston. We need, more people from the region to really understand what it is. We do have some people, but we really do want to understand what it is that people are facing outside of the city of Houston too, to know, because we heard a lot of that, and we just want to make sure that those voices are represented too. And then if you haven't seen this yet, we just announced this save the date in the middle of last week, I think. So October is National Arts and Humanities Month. We are going to, every October, during National Arts and Humanities Month, bring together the sector in sort of a public way. So we'll do some kind of forum, symposium, conference style day. So this will be on Tuesday, October 14th from 9 to 5. We'll have a forum or a conference or a symposium, whatever the right word is that you want to call it. We went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on what word we should use. We landed on forum. It's at the Hobby Center, and it's going to be a series of professional development workshops for artists, professional development workshops for arts organizations, and also we're going to dig deeper into some of these 4 platform areas. We're also going to have a session called What's on the Ballot. So there's an election in November, and so we'll have people talk about what's on that November ballot, and do any of those things matter to arts and culture? What kinds of things should you be paying attention to? And we'll share some resources, so we'll make sure that service people understand, I used to run Fresh Arts too, and I know that there are these service organizations like Fresh Arts and Swamp and Dance Source and all of these entities that are working really hard to make sure that the sector understands what resources exist for them. And so we want to use forums like this too to make sure that people understand what already exists. And then we'll sort of build on it from there. So join us on October 14th. We're going to have a day of community gathering, and then we're going to have a reception in the evening at the Hobby Center, and we're going to invite elected officials from the city and from the county, and also from the state and from the federal government. So we want the arts sector to be in the same spaces with elected officials, and we want elected officials to be in the same spaces with the arts sector. Okay, and then Molly sent me some of the questions that people wrote whenever they RSVP'd for this, so I put them up here, and I figured we'd go through those, and then I'm finished. So one of the questions was, I'd like to know more about current or pending legislation at local, state, or federal level that could positively or negatively impact the dance community. Are there examples of successful local or state policies that have created a more supportive environment for dance? And how can we use those examples as models for future policies? How can we effectively lobby our representatives to support arts-friendly policies? And what have been the most impactful talking points? So I think that this is a lot. I'll start with the last question, which is, what are the most impactful talking points? I'll tell you that on the Hugh Arts website, we have a news and resources tab where we have pulled talking points, and we have created them in these sort of like social media shareable blocks. And we're about to actually encourage everybody during the month of October, during National Arts and Humanities Months, to share these impact slides with people. We'll share ours. We'll also pull some. Americans for the Arts also does some slides and resources about impact of the arts and culture sector for October. So we're going to be sharing those out with the sector. You'll get it if you're on the newsletter, and you'll see it if you're following us on social media. So be sure that you join there. But we have a slew of the sort of talking points specific to Houston. The Americans for the Arts does talking points that are broad about sort of public perception of arts and culture at the federal level, but we have some that are specific to Houston. I think to answer the questions about like what's happening in the dance community and what are policies that exist in other places, the big one for me is the change to the civic art idea, the change to adding performance, because there are some large dollars available for public art. And it really has only been thought of in a very sort of like narrow way, but there are examples of places that have thought of it more holistically, like spoken word poetry and all kinds of different kinds of things like that. And so I think looking at some of those examples are really good. And I don't know if Dance USA or some of those organizations are probably thinking about those kinds of things too.
Yeah, Dance USA does a lot of, they have like a director of government affairs whose like sole focus is figuring out what is happening and how it does relate to dance, and more specifically like nonprofit dance. So yeah, following them for like unraveling of like what is happening in real time.
What's the latest too, because they're sort of on top of that. And the other thing I'll add is that like Texans for the Arts hires a lobbyist every year, which is also why everybody should be a member of Texans for the Arts. If you're not, please join Texans for the Arts, because they hire a lobbyist with those dollars. The year we didn't have a lobbyist, we did not get an increase in funding. In fact, our funding got vetoed for cultural districts and for some other funding. And so the lobbyist piece of it is really important. But still, that lobbyist can only monitor like a certain number of things. And so looking at sort of like the genre-specific entities too is really important too, because sometimes it's a matter, like this year there was something that was going before the legislature that really impacted museums, and there was something that really impacted like ticket sales for big theaters. But you know, Texans for the Arts didn't necessarily have that on their radar until those communities said to them, hey, this is really important to us. We really need you to be looking out for this too. And then that's how it got added too. Okay. How can we support immigrant, international, or other vulnerable artists? For example, are there free or low-cost legal resources, visa, work permits, benefits, and protections? I'll tell you what I know about this. Maybe somebody else in the room knows something else. TALA is Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts. They are pro bono legal services. They do a legal hotline 4 times a year where you can call in and ask any legal question that you have. They support arts organizations or individual artists, I think with a budget under a certain amount. It's something like, I'm not going to say it. It's because I'm going to be wrong. But it's not it's not a huge budget. It's for like mid-sized and small organizations or individual artists. Who would be eligible for their pro bono funding, but they have, if you just have a question about like, I'm trying to figure something out about a visa or about any of those things, that's a really good place to start. I don't know if there are other people who know.
Dance NYC, that's the like New York focused dance service organization, they do like a field-wide call, and they've gotten really specific in the last few months, and they've had one last week on supporting immigrant what signage you need to have up so that you can have a, sort of like a deemed, like this is a private area and like ICE can't come in unless they have a specific warrant that says we need to be in Office 201, that you have signage. They have a lot of really helpful
For the recording, New Sanctuary Coalition.
New Sanctuary Coalition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have one too?
I was just going to say that I think a good start for many people that I think they don't remember is to actually just look on like government websites to see what kind of permits are available, visas are available. Because I've been working with trying to get certain people from other countries to come here, and also I have lots of immigrant friends that are here that are on visas, and I think that understanding like what people can and cannot do on their visas is very important because I think even within institutions, people fail to recognize the danger that they can be putting people in, regardless like of how well we want to benefit people as artists, make sure they get paid or what have you. Like there are certain legalities where people will get in trouble. So I think that even just like government websites.
Yeah, so even non-arts entities that are looking at these kinds of things are sort of like a place to start. Okay, fundraising for a for-profit arts organization. So one thing is that we're going to be looking at the economic opportunity piece. Economic opportunity, most artists are actually for-profit organizations or for-profit businesses because they're individuals who are working for themselves. But also, there are many artists or for-profit arts organizations who do work for the public benefit. And if you are a for-profit organization who is also doing work for the public benefit, you might qualify for something like fiscal sponsorship. And in Houston, there are several different entities or places where people can be fiscally sponsored. Fresh Arts is one of them. I think, different arts organizations fiscally sponsor projects that they're doing sometimes themselves. But there's a sort of a formal fiscal sponsorship program at Fresh Arts. And that is sort of like the rules are for fiscal sponsorship are if the work that you're doing meets the mission of the entity, any nonprofit entity can sponsor a for-profit entity if that entity meets the nonprofit's mission, and if the work that they're doing is sort of like for the public benefit. And most of the time, arts events would fall under that category. Even if you're making money from it, even if you're selling tickets for it, nonprofits do that kind of thing all the time. But there are just sort of like a couple of check boxes that you have to go through, but anybody who does a fiscal sponsorship program could walk you through what those check boxes look like. And then the Economic Opportunity Working Group for Hugh Arts is going to be looking at how to make sure individual artists who are for-profits are getting the support that they need. Do the presenters have any experience with Health and Human Services grants for bringing arts programs to underserved communities? I think that Episcopal Health Foundation is an entity in Houston that's been thinking sort of like more broadly about what health for community means. I think we as arts organizations sometimes fall into the trap of only looking at funding from arts funders and not looking at, and that's one of the things that we want to be looking at with Hugh Arts too, is what about workforce development funds? Like so often there are creative workforce development needs, and sometimes we don't understand the language sometimes of workforce development, and so one of the jobs that Hugh Arts has is to try and translate the language between, Health and Human Services or workforce development or some of those things that might apply to us they already exist. It's not like we need to ask for something new. It already exists. It's just understanding how to tap into those kinds of things. And then one example of an entity I think that is looking at this closely is Chat. They're actually now part of Mid-America Arts Alliance, and they look a lot at art and health and community. And then the last question that came through before said, looking at starting an organization for disability advocacy. So I don't know if that's somebody in this room or somebody, but I think the question about that, I think is the same actually as what you said about sort of starting with the non-arts entities that are looking at that. Like who's already doing it? Who can you already tap into that's doing that work already? And then are there specific like arts related things that don't exist and that aren't part of that. And then I think that looking at those groups that are doing advocacy work already at the federal or state levels too, those networks are so great. I mean, they're membership networks, and a lot of times the leaders of those organizations really understand who's out there in the world and what people are interested in, because those people are calling them saying like, what about us? What about this? What about that? And so oftentimes they're able to sort of connect people with like interests. And so that's where I would start with something like this, is look at like what already exists for disability advocacy. And if you're thinking specifically about arts disability advocacy, talking to an advocacy organization and saying, have you talked to anybody else who's interested in disability, and sort of like getting that group together. So that's all I have.
Does anybody have any questions for Marcy or Harrison?
I actually had a question in regards to the task force. You had mentioned a name on how the people that were on the task force were, for lack of better words, hired.
Uh-huh.
I was just curious, there was like an application, and then how were they picked? I'm just curious.
For the initial task. So we have, I guess, let me clarify by saying this group started with the cultural districts. So there are 7 state designated cultural districts. Harrison leads the 5th Ward district. So that's sort of like how he's been part of this from the ground up. And then each of the leaders of the 7 cultural districts sort of started this work. So I guess they were the initial task force who was looking at this. And then the next step was the cultural district said, wait a minute, this is about more than us. It's about the community. It's about people who aren't necessarily in cultural districts, but we believe, the cultural district said, we believe that if we can help the sector win, we win too. Like, we can all win together, and we sort of all need each other too. And so the decision was made that we do an open call and say, who wants to be part of this? And so we put out an open call, and then Trepwise, who was the consulting company at the time, selected the task force members because they were working directly with Trepwise last year to put together this platform. They were like the advisory group or the focus group, basically, to like help to build this platform. But then it was based on really the community conversations that were an outgrowth of that task force. Now we're at the 3rd phase of the process, where we have some funding to hire some people to lead some of these initiatives. And so that's the part that we're going to announce later on this week, is that we did an application. We put out job descriptions. We had like 80-something applicants for the jobs. And then we had a group of a hiring committee, basically, who hired the people for those positions. And also, I'll say, the other piece that we did an open call for is our pin, or button. I'm pretty sure that was Harrison's idea, actually, to do an open call to the community to say, like, hey, we want to hire a local artist to design these buttons. And so we did an open call for this. I guess it was like a year and a half ago or something like that. And we had some great applications also from the arts community. And I guess it was the cultural districts that were the deciding group on what the logo for Hugh Arts would be. And this is Houston artist Sebastian Gomez de la Torre is who was selected for that project.
Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I was just going to ask about Mocha. Yes, okay.
If there's like a position that Hugh Arts is taking on advocating for an office within the city. It seems to be in limbo right now.
So I didn't say that at the city level, one of the things that the Whitmire administration has put into place is an arts and culture committee for the first time ever. So there is an arts and culture committee that technically has monthly meetings on the calendar, but in reality has quarterly meetings. And that is a group of city council members or their staffers who get together and hear from the arts community. So I think the good news about the Arts and Culture Committee is that there now is a venue for the arts to have a sort of direct line of communication with city government that has never existed before in sort of that public way. That's like an open access kind of conversation, as opposed to setting up a meeting with a city council member or something like that, which everyone is, eligible to do. The Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs is something that has been, different in recent years, and in the near recent years, and in the near recent years. So I think the relationship that Houston Arts Alliance and the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs have had with the city has really been different over the last 15 years. It's gone sort of like flip-flopped back and forth between Houston Arts Alliance having a sort of like a direct relationship with sort of a liaison at the city, to where Houston Arts Alliance was really sort of like the entity that was deciding what was going to be happening with arts and culture. In 2015, there was a citywide cultural plan that was created, and when that cultural plan was created, the members of the community who came to those town halls and those forums said, we want there to be more of an intermediary between the city and between Houston Arts Alliance, because we think they need more oversight. There were a couple of there were a couple of things that had happened in the community. People wanted to better look at the way that the arts grants were distributed. They wanted more equity and more transparency in the process. And there were a couple of big civic art projects that hadn't gone well. And so the community said, we want there to be more oversight. And so as a result of that 2015 plan, the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs was created. And so the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs has only been in place for the past 10 years or so. It never existed before that. And they did make changes in the way that the grants were distributed through the HOT funds. They did make some changes in the way that the civic art program worked. And then with this new mayoral administration, it was decided that that office had grown to 4 people, I think, at the time. And then 2 people resigned, and there was a hiring freeze at the city at the time, and so they did not rehire those positions. And then the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs director they've never officially made an announcement about what happened to the director of the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs, but she was no longer there. And then the last sort of remaining person was the admin person in the department, who had been reassigned to another department, the communications department, I think. Since then, and what was announced at the last Arts and Culture Committee meeting, which I think was last month, the person who is in charge of public art at the airports, Alton Delaney, has been named the Curator of Arts for the City of Houston, which effectively is the head of the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs, with a different title, but is also still fully responsible for the airport art initiative, as far as I understand it. And then they also put out a job description in May, I think it was, for a cultural arts administrator, I think was the title, and they have not yet hired that position. So there is funding in the city budget this year to fund the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs. The Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs is on the books, and there is funding for the department. And so that is on the list of the Hugh Arts working group focused on public funding. I invite you to join the group, because it's going to be that's going to be a good one.
I think what's really important. You talked about the win with sending people to the Midtown meeting, but when we first started this work, I remember one of the things we kept talking about is we don't know how to go talk to politicians unless you're into politics, right? And we also noticed that we had very low confidence as an art sector when it came to crossing outside of art. We're very confident inside our bubble, but when we go to council and things like that, we didn't have as much confidence. So to see that Hugh Arts is now sending people out to talk confidently about the sector with numbers and data, and we're actually getting things done is really cool. That job posting was not on the website until we were about to go to the monthly meeting. So I know that the job was put on there because they knew we were coming to the monthly meeting to advocate for a position. So it's the work the advocacy work we identified was the missing piece for the sector, but also I think it's and this is not just our work, tons of people are working in Hugh Arts now, but it's those small wins that Marcy was talking about is good to have because this is a long game, and some of this will stretch further than probably our institutions, but we do have some small wins that we're seeing with Hugh Arts, and then the more people that come to the table, the more ideas we have, the more perspectives we have, and I see those small wins growing with more participation. I'm always advocating for more dancers at the table, more choreographers at the table, because I just think we have really fresh ideas, and we think differently because we move bodies, and there's a transferable skill there that's needed in some of these working groups. So just wanted to shout out that the work is happening and it's working. If you want to be a part of something successful, then you should join a working group.
And the other reason dancers' voices need to be at the table is because they're not going to get put in the policies unless there's somebody saying like, hey, what about us? Or hey, what about performance? Or hey, what about this? I mean, you have to be sitting at the table to be able to make that argument too.
Anybody else have a final lingering question? Great. Thank you both
Yes,
so much.
thanks for having us.
This is really great. And please do sign up to follow the QR stuff. They send out a message when there is those monthly or whenever they do meet. Arts and culture.
The Arts and Culture Committee meetings, yeah. Right, we send those out whenever they are.
It's been really valuable to go and attend and just see the conversation, and it is really powerful to see like a room of arts folks show up.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, whether you can go and like testify, or you can just go and listen, but it's really valuable either way, and it's important.
Yeah, I think that 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon that you find out about 2 days before sometimes whether it's going to happen or not is hard for a lot of people's schedules, but it is the ones that I have been able to get there for. It is really like so nice to be part of the community because there are so many people from the community who are there, and it's just like nice. It's nice to just be with everybody, and see people come out. And our committee, the Arts and Culture Committee, has the most people. Most of those committees don't have people showing up. People show up for the Arts and Culture Committee, and I think it's so important because we send a message to city council members every time those committees do happen. It's like, oh no, there are people who care about this. Like you can't just, cut these kinds of things out and think that nobody's going to say anything because there are people who show up for this committee. Like people are paying attention to what's happening, and so I think that's like the first message that we're starting with too, right? Is like we're here and we're interested and we want to be part of this.